May we learn together in hope and joy. Please be seated. I thought back this week to, 20, 25 years ago, when I came to northeastern Pennsylvania as an adult, maybe as a child. I remember sitting down and having lunch with someone who had grown up here, lives decades here. I remember looking out the window and seeing the mountains that were all around, and commenting to this person, boy, isn't that pretty scenery? Look out and see these mountains. Everywhere I look, I see mountains. And someone from Ohio, where it is flat and flatter, it was something new. It was interesting. It was beautiful to me. And the person looked at me, looked out the window, and went, yeah, in a very unconvincing way. And I, at that moment, felt a little bit of judgment towards that person. Like, how can you not appreciate the land around you? But now, 20, 25 years on, look around and see the mountains, and I say, oh, there they are. It doesn't seem as magnificent to me anymore. And I guess, I'm not sure this is a good example of familiarity, breeding contempt, but just you get used to things. You start to take them for granted. You see them all the time, and they become ordinary. And that's not just true for things that we see, it's things that we hear as well. And some of the passages that we heard today, I think might well fall into that category. Of course, the Beatitudes, that for many of us we have heard since we were yay high. We hear them over and over and over again, and they are remarkable. They are life-changing. And yet we hear them now, many of us, myself included, I know them. Blah, blah, blah. Likewise, at the end of our first reading, from Micah chapter 6, verse 8, there is another of those verses that you have heard and get used frequently. What does the Lord require of you but to do justly and to love? And I say mercy along with the hymn, just because I memorized it from King James Version. I love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. And we hear that in Isaiah, we've heard this very often. It doesn't seem all that special. But I think that's just because once we've heard it 5, 10, 50, 500 times, maybe we stop looking at it the way we ought. And so I want to think about that verse from Micah, see how it kind of lines up with what Jesus is saying, and maybe look at these a little bit anew. Not in a fresh way, but in a changed, different, perhaps more encouraging, perhaps more challenging way. And it's a simple outline. Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God, add a poem, and you're out. You're all set there. That's 7 years. Some of you might get. Do justice. And what I think is interesting about this phrase is when I think about justice, the verb that I would put before it isn't, I don't think, most of the time, the verb do. Do I pray for justice? Every day. Do I hope for justice? Every day. Do I long for justice? Just about every time I put on the TV or listen to the radio or do the silly thing and look on social media, I long for justice. But rare is the time, and maybe this is just telling on myself, but rare is the time where I think to myself, I need to do justice. That word do really in the Hebrew means to bring forth or to give birth to make alive, to bring about the reality of justice. And what I like to do, besides the longing and hoping for justice, is to do, and this is not to criticize the hymn, this is not to criticize the hymn, this is not to criticize the hymn, but did you see in the second verse who is called upon to do justice? The rulers. When I think about doing justice, think that's exactly what our government ought to be doing. That's exactly what our leaders ought to be doing. And by petition your government so that justice can be done. Now, he's not saying not to do that, but he's saying you do justice. What is it that you can do that might make this world, or this country, or this community, or this church, or your family, or maybe just a close relationship that you have? What can you do to make those places of justice? Blessed, Jesus says, are the peacemakers. Jesus doesn't say, blessed are those who pray for peace, although I'm sure you agree with that. Jesus does not say, blessed are those who long for peace, although he would hope that we do. Jesus says, blessed are the makers of peace. That is hard, deliberate work. Jesus is not content. Just as Micah was not content for us to simply sit back and hope that good things happen. Because when we sit back and allow things to happen, it isn't justice that unfolds. It's more often than not. Quite to be honest. Do justice, Micah says. Love mercy. Love kindness. Love loving kindness. This word, hesed, in the Hebrew, which is all over the Hebrew Bible, is a beautiful word that describes God's positive disposition towards human beings. Sometimes that's mercy, sometimes that's kindness, sometimes that's love, sometimes that's loving kindness. We hear it in the Psalms and elsewhere, but so much in the Psalms we hear in Psalm 136 and elsewhere, and we say in our liturgy, His mercy endures forever. That is His hesed, His loving kindness endures forever. Surely, at the end of Psalm 23, goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That word, goodness and mercy, what we celebrate in God, and we love in God. It's easy to love those who love us, and it's easy to love, I'm just speaking of people hiding back here, to love the love that they show us, yes? When somebody pats you on the back, we love that. When somebody writes us a kind note, we love that. When somebody offers encouragement or shows mercy to us, we love that. But do you know what's hard? Again, maybe just for me, is to love loving others. Because there are lots of people in this world that I am not a big fan. The things that they do, what is right in this world, of loving